people are saying is, for instance, to be inclusive, you have to speak like this, think like this, and behave like this, and if you don't, we'll exclude you.
Are we living in the post-woke era? The backlash has been going on for years. It's been turbocharged in Donald Trump's America, while here in Britain, Reform UK has promised to scrap equality, diversity and inclusivity schemes in local and national government. And of course, Kemi Badenoch has warned that identity politics could, in the long run, lead to civil war. It's certainly hard to imagine a Prime Minister taking the knee as Keir Starmer did in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter campaign. But most of us still want to live in a country that is comfortable with diversity, that values openness and fairness, and does try to stop discrimination. So is there a way to pursue those goals in a post-woke world? My next guest is Simon Fanshawe, a diversity consultant and one of the founders of the charity Stonewall. He's also mixed his politics with comedy, with a background as a stand-up comedian. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Hello, thank you.
So tell us first, why was Stonewall set up? It was in the 1970s, wasn't it?
89.
Yeah.
After the in the wake of the so-called Section 28 thing. Look, put very simply, what Stonewall set out to do was to ensure that, as an example, if you went into hospital and your partner was in hospital, the partner's doctor could talk to you about his or her medical condition, because there was no legal structure to the relationship. There was no ability to serve your country in the armed forces. There was no ability or opportunity to offer your services as a parent to fostering an adoption. All those things were denied to lesbians and gays specifically. And when we set up Stonewall, I always say to people, if we'd wandered up and down the streets of London and said, do you think gays are a jolly good thing in 1989? The answer would come back 80-20, no. On the other hand, if you walk up and down the street and say, do you think it's right that a group of people should be discriminated against by the law as a group? Most people in Britain will go, no, that's not fair, even if they didn't approve of you. So that was the genesis of Stonewall. And if you look back to its origins and all the campaigning then, it was all about equality. It was all about give us a place that we can play our role in society.
Exactly. So that's so interesting about why Stonewall was set up. But now we're living in the post-woke backlash, which is killing diversity schemes. So the argument is that it's gone well beyond kind of tackling effectively legal discrimination embedded in the legal system to a kind of culture of promoting diversity and therefore alienating a lot of people. Is that something you sympathise with?
I spend most of my time going into companies and organisations helping them to unpick what's been attached to this EDI. Sorry to do air quotes, but it's a damaged brand, and what's happened is lots of things have been attached to it, and part of the problem is that they've become obligations. In other words, what people are saying is, for instance, to be inclusive, you have to speak like this, think like this, and behave like this, and if you don't, we'll exclude you. So what builds up around it, a couple of things, I think. One is that equality and fairness, the absence of discrimination, which you referred to, transmuted into this notion of identity politics. But this is not just true of the lesbian and gay struggle or struggles around ethnicity and equality in relation to race and so on and so forth. It's all over the place. We've become very atomized and very, very personally centered. So if you think of the notions of well-being, when people talk about well-being, they talk about my well-being. They don't talk about our well-being as a society. So you've got something that's going on there, which is about people's personal identity being something that they use and in society. That's a problem, because what happens in organizations is that people have got to get along. There's no good just kind of saying, I want. You've got to get along. So that happened. And I think around that also grew up a series of ideological norms around diversity, that this was what you had to do this, you had to do that, you had to do the next thing. And I think the backlash, as you accurately demonstrated in your introduction, it's not against fairness and opportunity and people being judged on their merit and their talent. That's what it was all about in the first place, the contents of the character, not the color of my skin. What it became about was a sort of professionalized set of obligations. I mean, you can get a qualification in it now. I mean, a qualification in being human and getting on with other people's difference.
That's so interesting that you refer to it as an obligation. And the other thing, I think, the phrase that would spring to mind when people are thinking about this issue is the kind of thought police element to it, that it goes beyond what you so articulately set out the original aims of Stonewall to combat specific legal discrimination, to making sure people think in the, and I'll use air quotes now, right way and that if you don't think in the right way, you should somehow be punished.
Yeah, I think there's a mistaken thought behind people behaving like that. You can't really change the way people think. Behaviour is what changes thinking. Thinking doesn't change behaviour. So for years, what people did was they kind of went into these re-education camps in organisations, or you have to think like this and think like that. What really matters is behaviour. What really matters is how we treat each other, in the certain knowledge that we'll, from time to time, be clumsy or malicious with each other, and they have different routes for solution. But when we are clumsy with each other, what we need to be able to do more than anything else is to be able to deal with it. And so what happens, instead of putting the emphasis on we're human beings, we have to understand each other's difference, we then don't, what do we do when we don't, how do we deal with it? What happened was people almost tried to stop it happening. Do you remember when you were a kid and you had a bike? I don't know whether you were like this. When I first rode a bike, I thought if you stayed still on the bike and didn't pedal, you'd stay on. And if you pedaled, you'd fall off. Well, of course, it's the opposite. It's the same thing. You can't stop this stuff happening. What you have to be able to do is pedal and deal with it when it does.
So let's talk a bit about some of the obstacles which aren't necessarily legal, which do hold people back, and whether or not diversity training, if I can put it that way, can be helpful. I mean, I think you and I might agree that there is a case that people from different backgrounds often get held back because the people hiring them, you know, frankly, to put it bluntly, are people like me, white middle-class men who tend to hire people who look like them. It was recently reported the Treasury abandoned its numeracy tests to try and boost diversity. Now, on one level, you might say, well, that's a sensible measure to help people who would otherwise would find it difficult to get those kind of jobs because they're based on a sort of traditional hiring metric to get in. Is that going too far?
Well, what you have to do is go back to what we're trying to achieve here. And what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to remove blocks to people who've got talent and who want to succeed. First thing to say, quite a lot of that's been quite successful. There are many, many, many more women in senior positions now and have access to those kind of opportunities. Similarly, many, many more people who are not white have access to those opportunities and are thriving in so doing. Disability, I think, is still quite an issue. But the question is, you asked at the beginning, what is the actual block to the talent? Because one of the problems is people treat the symptom. I don't know whether people have seen this cartoon, but there's a cartoon of three children standing behind a fence and there's a ball game going on the other side of the fence. And one of the children is tall, one is medium-sized, and one is small. The tall one can see over the fence, the medium one barely can, and the small one can't at all. The next cartoon is a series of boxes where the medium one's got one box and the little one's got two boxes. They're all at the same height. That's tackling the symptom. What I always say to people is take down the wall. In other words, understand what the barriers actually are. So I don't know about the Treasury thing. I haven't looked into the detail. But if what's happening is that people are not succeeding in numeracy, the answer is not to lower the standard. The answer is to increase the ability to teach people, to get them up to the standard that you need for the task. So what I do in organizations is I'm always saying to people, when you see these imbalances between men and women or black and white or whatever, first question, does it matter? It might not, but it might. And if it matters, why does it matter in terms of what you're trying to do? So, for instance, HR is dominated by women and gay men. I don't know why. Does that matter? It might not. Secondly, what is the actual solution, the problem to this? What is actually happening? So the FTSE 100, I don't know whether you came across this, but some years ago, I looked at the pictures of the top three people in the FTSE 100, each company, chair, chief exec, chief finance officer. And based on their pictures, I came to the conclusion that there are more white men called John, David and Andrew than there are women or people who are not white in those top 300 positions. Progress, by the way, I did it last year again. You can add Michaels now, very exciting. But my point being, what's actually causing that? Now, you made the point about you being a white middle-class white man or whatever. The mechanism that's actually going on there is not, oh, I don't like gay people, I'm black people, I don't like women. That's not the mechanism. The mechanism is what people think you need to be a chief exec, chair, or chief finance officer. So what you're doing is you're replicating yourself. So what I say to people is, you've got that, don't do that. Recruit for difference. So you're always trying to find real diversity, not based on identity, but on skill and the story they bring.
I mean, I hear what you say very quickly because we're running out of time. You fell out with Stonewall over the trans issue. You question whether allowing men to self-identify as women might have an impact on women's rights. That, for me, is an example of it all going far too far. A perfectly legitimate organisation campaigning for legitimate things being hijacked for a political agenda which most people thought was completely surreal.
Okay, very quickly, that's not the issue I actually fell out with them over.
No.
What I fell out with them over was that previously what we did, as I described at the beginning, was put together these broad constituencies of support around bigger principles. What Stonewall failed to do was find the bigger principle. What is the solution to the clash between sex and gender? What is the solution between women's rights and access for trans people to certain services? What is the practical solution we can really bind a huge number of people around? That's where I fell out with Stonewall, because what they did was they went into no debate territory and said, you have got to do X, Y, and Z. And in so doing, they provoked the backlash. And the support for trans people, sadly, is going down, 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 down. My comment is not about the trans debate. My comment is about the style of how you create meaningful change for everybody in society.
Yes, absolutely. And so what is the way back, Simon? Because we've still got about 40 seconds. What is the way back?
Get back to the knitting. I mean, all the work that I do says to companies, why are you doing diversity? This is a lens on talent. This is about fairness and opportunity. It's about removing barriers where there are blocks to talent. And it's then about combining the difference, not who people are, but what they bring through who they are. And the skills they bring and the stories they bring, you combine that in order to find the best solutions to drive the company forward. And in the age of AI, that is the profoundly human skills that we can bring that AI can't bring. So diversity becomes it is how we meet the challenge of AI.
And I guess, therefore, that corporations shouldn't necessarily retreat from DEI, but they should get back to their knitting. They should, where they can, eliminate the barriers to progress for different groups, but without signing up to the full political agenda. Simon Fanshawe, one of the original founders of Stonewall, thank you for coming on the programme and talking about how DEI has lost its way.